Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2016 Hack Summit. We're joined now by Jennifer Pahlka, who's a former Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the White House. And Jennifer is also the founder and CEO of Code for America. Thank you for joining us today, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So this is going to be a fireside chat where we'll be able to interact with Jennifer. And audience, we've already started to poll you and ask you questions, so we can find out a little bit more about you. We'll be polling you more as this fireside chat goes on, and we'll also be giving you the opportunity to ask Jennifer questions. So please feel free to ask questions and upvote each other's questions, and we'll take the highest upvoted questions off the list and ask them to Jennifer. So Jennifer, I'd love to first hear a little bit more about your background. So tell us more a little bit about how you grew up and what your early career was like, and how that led to your current role at Code for America.
Okay, sure. Well, I don't have. I'm not a coder by training. In fact, my first job out of college, I worked for a child welfare organization, Children's Home Society of California. It was a really stressful job, actually. I don't think people realize how difficult social services are. I was not on the front lines. I was in the back office as a struggling, 21-year-old. But then I went traveling and did a bunch of other stuff, and I ended up in tech, as many people did in the 90s in San Francisco. And I in tech media, really. So I was running the Game Developers Conference and Game Developer Magazine, and launched Gama Sutra for many years, and then took a break and came back and was working on Web 2.0. Really, I mean, doesn't it seem like so long ago, Web 2.0?
I remember that. In fact, and I, by the way, attended the Game Developer Conference over a decade ago, and I actually got into the whole game industry. I was so inspired. I was so excited to go to the Game Developers Conference. It was a thrill for me to meet all my kind of hero game programmers. So thanks for doing that.
Oh, it was a wonderful, wonderful time in my life. The game development community is really a wonderful community. I guess I'm glad to be missing Gamergate and all of these horrible things, but it was really, really fun for me. It was sort of like the most creative, geniuses in the world. It was just so much fun. I left that when I had my daughter, and I went back into producing events with Web 2.0. I was working for the company that was partnered with O'Reilly Media on Web 2.0 starting in 2004. And Web 2.0 was pretty awesome. And then starting in about 2008, 2009, you started to look at, where else can you apply these ideas? And people don't remember anymore, but in 2008, the line was that the internet had elected a new president. Barack Obama there was so much, Blue State Digital and all the online platforms were so much part of that election that a lot of us were asking, well, how could you apply these principles and values of Web 2.0 to actually governing? Can you actually make the country run better with these ideas? And so it was really out of the research for that event that I became aware of how government technology is built and bought, still while running Web 2.0. So half of my life was the world of sort of Flickr, Twitter, Google, world-changing times, incredibly fast-moving, incredibly high value. And then the other side was looking at government technology, which moved very slowly, was extremely expensive, and frankly, very low value. And the contrast of those two worlds was sort of hard to ignore. And since I had that background in child welfare, I knew what it meant when these big IT systems in government fail. It means bad things for real people. And I just got really excited about it and wanted to do something about it.
Wow, it's an amazing story. And tell us a little bit more about your work at the White House. What presidency was that, and what kind of work did you do there?
So I started Code for America in 2010. Did a couple of years of it, and it got some attention from Todd Park, who was then the US CTO. So after President Obama was elected for his second term, a couple days after the election, Todd Park called me and said, I would like you to come to the White House and help run this program that he had modeled after Code for America, called the White House Presidential, not the White House Fellows, the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. It was the same sort of basic idea, bring great tech talent into government, but put them in agencies, I'm sorry, we haven't really talked about Code for America, but that's what Code for America does with local governments. So I kind of reverse pitched him because well, I've been running a fellows program, and actually, I didn't think I should move to DC, but that's a long story. I ended up saying yes, but I said yes because I said, look, you've got to pay attention to what is going on around the world, particularly in the UK, where they have really built a unit that is doing the world-class digital work within government, with the Government Digital Service, and started by a guy named Mike Bracken. And I said to Todd, look, the US has got to be able to do this too. It's not just about innovators in agencies that are, you know, one person or two people in an agency trying their best to introduce new ideas. We really need something at the core of government that is technically, design-wise, process-wise, excellent, and creates the kinds of interfaces that the American public wants to see, needs to see, at the cost that we know makes sense. So after 6 or 7 months of negotiation, we kind of decided to go do that. So I went to the White House from June 2013 to June 2014. I got a year leave of absence from Code for America, and it was a crazy, crazy year, but very much worth it.
Wow, wow, amazing story. So
yeah,
as you started Code for America, I'm sure that, you know, kind of initially when you first started out, you know, it was just kind of an idea and it was just getting off the ground. How do you rally support? How do you convince people that this is important, and how do you get initial funding and people to join with you? What was your strategy at that point?
Strategy might be a generous term. I was just sort of using my network and talking to people about the idea, and hoping that people would support it, and they did. I think that it was very lucky in both sort of the framing of the problem, in deciding to tackle local government first, and in timing. So you've got to remember, this is sort of 2009, 2010. We're talking about, so President Obama's just gotten into office. He's been talking about transparency, accountability, et cetera. And in his first couple of days in office, he committed to a very aggressive open data agenda from day two, literally day two of his administration. And so there was this idea about what you could do with open data and how you could transform government started to be in the air. And on the local side, you had financial crises with local governments running out of money. And so there started to be a bit more appetite for real change. So I was very lucky to be framing an idea that I think people hadn't. They kind of instinctively knew that it was a real problem and that it could be addressed with a different approach to technology and a different kind of talent in government. But no one had sort of said it in those terms. So I was just very lucky. I was easily got some small seed funding to just get it off the ground, and then was able to convince cities to get on board pretty quickly. They also paid in, so it wasn't just getting grants. I had paying customers from the start, and that helped, I think, the funding ecosystem feel comfortable that this is something worth doing and that it could work.
And coming from kind of the private industry background, was it a big change for you personally to work with governments that may not be as fast at technology adoption and iteration?
The pace of things like contracts and projects in government is certainly slower. I was used to working on year-long cycles. That's what I've always done, producing events. When you produce the Game Developers Conference, you ship one big thing a year, but you always ship on time. Never slips, can't slip. So, I think it's certainly been challenging to set up a program. I personally don't say that I would find it so much frustrating in the slowness in itself. What can be difficult is long lead times and long cycles are very hard to learn from. So, to the extent that what both Code for America and our partners and our funders and the people who come work with us and give us their time we all need is faster learnings. So it's only a problem, really, I think, in that sense.
Great. So So tell us a little bit more about the fellowship program for Code for America. What is that all about?
So what essentially it is the Peace Corps for geeks. That's what we've called it for a long time. But it is a way that mid-career tech and design professionals can come do a year of service. And that year of service involves joining a small, generally 3-person team where you've got a mix of skill sets that's a lot like a startup. So, front end, back end, and a designer, product manager type of person. And that small startup team is paired with a local government that has a challenge and works with them over the course of the better part of 1 year to take an iterative, data-driven, and user-centered approach to building an app, essentially. And the building an app part is great, and many of the apps have had huge impact. Some of the apps haven't worked out so well, and that's sort of part of our process too. But what's really, really important is that the local government gets to go through a process that is truly iterative, truly user-centered, where they're really getting to know what's actually going on, and really data-driven. And that learning and that sort of culture change, where you have teams who have taken a more traditional waterfall approach or sort of policy-based approach in the past, they become incredibly enthusiastic about taking that approach in future projects. And that's been really profound for us. So the first couple of projects that we did through the fellowship, and this was starting in 2011, was our first year, we kind of set this model of a team of 3 folks would get assigned something. They could do a prototype in a couple, like 6 to 8 weeks. They'd show it to folks. It would then iterate throughout the course of the year. And we would be told by the time of the end, at the end of the project, if this had gone through regular channels, if this had been a procurement, it would have been 2 years, at least $2 million. And this is for something that, a couple people did in several weeks. So we've been following that pattern for a long time. Initially, it was things like school selection. So in Boston, we had this issue in front of us of they had changed how the parents, how they assigned kids to public schools. And they were sending out a printed brochure, but it was a mapping problem. So the printed brochure didn't really tell you anything. So the parents were very confused, and we just put up a site where you could type in your address, the age of your kid, and it would return a mapped list of schools that your kid was eligible to attend. Really simple, but also, not dealing with very sensitive data, not incredibly complex. So that's 2011. Fast forward to 2016. I came back yesterday from meeting our team who's working in Seattle with the Seattle Police Department. They're working on a really challenging problem. They have, the Seattle Police Department spends most of their time not with, bad guys with guns. They spend most of their time with mentally ill homeless people. People calling 911, and sort of the same folks over and over again who are struggling often with addiction issues, struggling with homelessness and poverty. And they don't have, they have a really great program to help divert those people into care instead of incarcerating them. We spend tons of money that we shouldn't be spending in this country incarcerating people, and people who are simply not dangerous. But they need real-time data to know who this person is, they've encountered them dealing with in the past, what care they might be getting, where they might be able to refer them so that they can easily deal with these, what they call low acuity calls in an efficient, respectful, and careful manner, get them out of the system. And I mean, this is just like incredibly huge impact if you can reduce the impact on the police department, but also get much, much better outcomes for the people of Seattle and particularly, the homeless population. But like it requires working with incredibly sensitive data, really difficult population, and it's just really profound, interesting work, and I'm just so proud of these fellows. They're doing things like going on multiple ride-alongs with the police department, helping them deal with cases on their own, so they really see the problems from the bottom up, and they're building technology that'll actually work in the field. That's sort of the core of what we do.
It's amazing. I remember when I was a kid, I worked for a company that did government contract work, and there was this very complicated request for proposal process.
Yep.
And we'd write this complicated proposal, submit that, and then we'd mark up our hourly rates by an enormous amount.
Yep.
And then there were certain rules about you had to be a government contractor, certified in a certain way.
Yep.
And then they would subcontract that out to other people, and everyone would take a little piece, right? Everyone would take their margin. And I thought the whole thing was stupid. And it took, 6, 12 more months, sometimes years, to get anything done. It was ridiculous. So does Code for America sidestep that process? And how do you, can you circumvent that? And if so, is there ever political resistance to not going through the official channels for how they normally source software development?
Sure, yeah. Let me first comment on what you said about that, because it's a really good point to make, which is that when we talk about the right kind of tech talent in government, it's the process that's a problem, not the people, really. You do sometimes get people who are trained in waterfall methods, and that's an issue. But we have almost exclusively found that people in government want to do the right thing. They know what they're doing now doesn't work, and they feel constrained by a set of regulations, compliance, governance, laws, policies that seem to tell them that they have to do it this way. They have to do it this, 7 months to even put together a proposal. Well, nothing's getting done. Everyone takes a piece of the pie kind of way. That's actually not true. You don't have to do it that way. But there's a whole bunch of myth busting and a whole bunch of sort of challenging the status quo, asking why, that needs to happen if you're going to get people out of that. To answer your question, do we get around it? I would say the fellowship program is a way to get around it. But it's funny because we have to go through our own several-month process to work with a city, to get a contract, to bring our fellows in. But once they're in, the way we write the contract doesn't specify exactly what they'll build. We're not there as contract software developers. They are often bringing us in as essentially an innovation program, and the software is sort of a byproduct of it. The interaction and the training that we do with the teams that partner with us in city governments is probably the bigger part of the value sometimes. We've heard that where we've had unbelievably successful outcomes on the software, like this cost, orders of magnitude less than what we were paying for before, and it's orders of magnitude better. And still those city partners will say, as wonderful as this is, it was the exposure to these methodologies and this culture that is actually even more valuable. So that's a big win for us. But yeah, we do have to do the same contracting to get in, but then we have a bunch of freedom, which is really, really nice. We have increasingly, though, been working directly at that problem of procurement. We did a project in California, with the state of California last year, for instance, where they were going to take a very waterfall, very expensive traditional approach to the child welfare system. And well, I mentioned that I worked in child welfare early in my career. It was very, very important to me that not happen, because I know too much about the human consequences of software that doesn't work for social workers and doesn't work for the kids in care. So we did a very incredibly fast sort of 6-week sprint to help them change that procurement to be agile, user-centered, modular, and attract a different set of vendors. And that's not what we normally do, but it's something that needs to happen. And we are one of many, many actors that are starting to help government not just sort of procure, teams of fellows like us, because that's a hack at the end. It's not changing the actual system. Lots of people are actually now working to change how procurement works. And that's a wonderful thing to say, 6 years into this project, because no one thought that was possible in 2010.
That's amazing. And so what I'm hearing here is that your goal is to leave them with the tools that they need themselves to innovate in a more iterative way. So is the idea that fellows eventually phase out of the project, or are they permanently there? And how does that, how can you actually get the internal staff, I guess, within the government to embrace these new methodologies? Do they ever resist that?
Well, of course there's always resistance, but we have seen much, much more enthusiastic adoption than we do resistance. The resistance often comes from people who are not working on the project, but look at it from a distance and worry that we're not compliant with one thing or another. And occasionally, from folks that are worried that a lightweight approach isn't appropriate in government. We use the word lightweight, and it's sometimes probably a confusing word for people. But I think in the software industry, we understand sort of lightweight solutions are often the best. overall, though, what we see at the end of a project, and so a typical fellowship program for us starts in January and ends the day before, the Thursday before Thanksgiving, or the Friday before Thanksgiving. So it's just a little under a year. We do try to leave them with the skills that they need to carry on, but almost every city that we work with at the end is still wanting to partner in some way. Oftentimes that means that they're hiring one of the fellows, not necessarily one on their team, but or they now then decide to create a chief innovation officer position that would continue on this work, or they try to make policy changes. But about half of our alumni fellows either continue to work in government or do startup that sell to government.
Wow.
So the point isn't that I mean, we do have this sort of natural end point on it, and that's important sometimes to force change. If there was no end point, there was never be any urgency. And as you mentioned earlier, things can go slowly in government. So we like having that urgency, but it usually is the beginning of something bigger, not the end.
So are the fellows compensated in any way? Are they volunteers? What is the financial model for the fellows?
Fellows are paid a stipend. Right now, I believe it's $50,000. So it's not market rate, but it's not entirely volunteer.
Got it. Great. So, and are you guys looking for more fellows right now?
So we will start looking for our next round of fellows in probably 6 weeks. Yeah, we kind of open up application period currently once a year, probably in the future moving to twice or 3 times a year.
Wow. So how can our audience find out more about becoming a fellow?
Well, there's not a ton on our website right now about the application process, but there is an overview of it for when it'll open up at codeforamerica.org/fellows, and you can see our 18 current fellows who are amazing. We get several hundred applications every year for this unglamorous, poorly paid work. People do seem to want to do it. And I think it's because the fellows that have gone through the program tend to talk about it as such a profound, meaningful experience in their lives. Not just the work that they do with city government, not just the coding and design work they do, but the opportunity to understand how, for instance, the Seattle Police Department works, or what it's like to be, homeless and mentally ill in Seattle. Or we've got a team right now working in New York City in the public schools. We've got a team working with people on probation who've just been released from prison, in Salt Lake City, and they're trying to help them make sure that they get timely text messages to remind them to comply with the terms of their probation so they don't end up back in jail. It's not the kind of thing that you're probably going to get to do at your average tech startup, is really understand the experience that people have in this country who are often less fortunate. They're not, every project is about sort of underserved populations, but a lot of them are. And so the people who come out of this year go, oh my God, you've got to go do this because it'll change your life.
Wow, it's amazing. I love how it's the opportunity for developers to kind of engage as social entrepreneurs in a lot of ways, where they're building something sustainable, but they're really helping the world at the same time. And I think the satisfaction that they'll get out of that, and the feeling they'll come away from that, from really helping others, you can't put a price on it.
You can't. But I will also say that a lot of that we've had 7 companies spin out of Code for America so far. So they're not only getting this amazing experience, sometimes painful, to be honest, sometimes really difficult experience, but they're also getting access to a set of problems that most people who in the tech industry don't see. And when you see a problem and you know how to fix it with technology, it's a great opportunity for a startup. The last startup that came out of Code for America is one called Remix. After Code for America, their Code for America fellowship ended, they went into Y Combinator. They had an incredibly competitive round for their seed round. It was led by Sequoia. They're taking off like wildfire. They help cities do currently transit planning, but eventually other kinds of planning, like orders of magnitude faster and better than they had been doing it. Great product market fit, but not the kind of thing that you would, transit planning isn't something like every YC company has enough insight into to actually, make a company around. And
Absolutely. I mean, you think
cool.
about how most entrepreneurs, who get started, they'll try to dream up an idea for a project in their living room, which is very dangerous because you're not engaging with customers. And so this is almost like customer development in a lot of ways, working with governments, ideas coming out of that. And Sequoia, I mean, that's a top tier VC firm. So that is a seriously, that's a trajectory that is paved the way, for that company to be very successful right now.
Yeah, and one of the reasons Sequoia and these other funds or firms are all so into this is that we've been ignoring government technology because of its slowness, and the sense that it was sort of locked up by these systems integrators and the Beltway bandits. Well, that's starting to change, and people are starting to realize it's a huge business. It's government technology, federal government technology is something like 80 billion. You add in state and local, and you're starting to get to like 170 billion dollars. So you and I have been in the game industry. Okay, so like games now, I don't know, when I left, games were 12 billion. I think they're up to 18 billion.
It was 10 billion when I was involved, but it's nowhere near what you're talking about.
Yeah, but I'm talking 10x the size of the game industry, and something that if you do it well, it actually, no kidding, literally can save lives and make people's lives better and make for like a more fair, just, equitable society. So it's a win.
I do some investing in startups on my own, and I know firsthand that the number one thing that investors look for in a startup is the market size. Is it going to be big enough, right? And the game industry in general has had a hard time attracting venture funding because it's very hit driven, it's not sustainable, it's not repeatable. You see a lot of stocks coming up and down in the public markets these days. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of this. So this is great. So let's go to the audience for a second here. So we've been polling the audience as we've been talking, and we asked the audience, would you consider taking a job in government? Now, I actually thought that this would be the opposite of what it is right now. I would think that there's been a stigma, a lot of people think, is the government, too slow? Is it too bureaucratic? But actually, the majority of our audience is saying that they would consider taking a job in the government, which is very promising.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then, have you worked in the government before? 80% have not worked in the government before, and yet they would still consider taking a job in the government, which is pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we want to do another poll here, which is about 18F. So maybe you can help give the audience some context. What is 18F?
Okay. So when I went to federal government for the year, I was at the front end of all of this. So we decided there needed to be a unit within federal government that attracted the top technology and design talent in the whole country and got them to work building digital services that work for the people. So we started this in June 2013. October 2013 is the day that government shut down and healthcare.gov launched. So we got this amazing example of why we need this, because you can't have a country where you can spend 3 years trying to get a law passed and then almost lose it because you can't put up a website that works. In the end, so that actually helped my agenda tremendously, which had not maybe as much support as I had hoped when I came in early. But once the site failed, there was a lot of support, and we ended up actually with 2 units that have fantastic technology and design talent in federal government that are going to be, the next time we need to do a healthcare.gov, they're there. The USDS, United States Digital Service, sits within the White House. It's part of the Office of Management and Budget. And they're sort of the SWAT teams that deal with the stuff that's going wrong, very expensive, sort of an intervention, Navy SEALs kind of thing. That's the unit that I had the biggest hand in setting up, because it's most similar, I think, to what they had in the UK. But it's very hard to hire like hundreds and hundreds of people into the White House, which has a very limited capacity. And the General Services Administration is the perfect place for teams of folks that can actually do digital services and consult on better procurement options. So 18F is a unit of the General Service Administration. It's about a block and a half from the White House. So I went back and forth between those 2 units all the time, those 2 buildings all the time. But actually 18Fers, and there's hundreds of them now, work in DC, San Francisco, and all around the country from home. Actually, I don't know the number, but some very large percentage of their employees actually just work from home. They have a great culture of remote work. So these are the folks that are making sure we don't have another healthcare.gov, making sure that recreation.gov actually works and has an API so that entrepreneurs can build on it. They were our partner in working with the California Department of Social Services on the child welfare system at the end of this year. And I think they've had a really amazing impact on federal government, not just creating more technical talent, but particularly the USDS team, I think, has had a really interesting influence on policymakers in DC. Policymakers also need to take a user-centered, data-driven, and iterative approach. We can't keep writing policy in an ivory tower, throwing it out in the world, and then walking away, because it doesn't work. We have too many policies in this country that don't work. Actually, I heard a statistic once, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little far off your question, but they surveyed the most senior policymakers in the country and asked them, do you think that the United States has the ability to write policy that works? And 16% of them said yes. Whoa. 84% of the senior policymakers, and I'm not talking about people in elected office right now, I'm talking about, it's actually the fellows of the National Academy of Public Administration. So 84% of them don't think we can even do it. And it's because they have a very waterfall approach to policy too. When they see that this works to make better websites, they go, oh, this is how we should actually be making policy. And I think that is going to change the world. But anyway, that's my pitch. I am very interested to hear what the audience thinks, if they've heard of these groups, and if so, if they think that they're having an impact on government.
All right, so I'm going to create a poll for the audience. Audience, please chime in here. So the question is, do you think the new initiatives in the government, especially 18F, is having a positive impact on the government? Yes, no, yes or no, or if you haven't heard of it or you're not sure, just select that one. And we'll see what the audience says here in real time. And it'll take about 10 seconds for the audience to start really filling this in, because there's about a 10-second delay on the YouTube streaming.
Okay.
So, but you can already start to see some of the votes coming in. So it's a little early right now, but it looks like so far the majority are saying yes, it has made an impact compared to no. Most people haven't heard of it yet, so it's new to a lot of our audience members. But those who have heard of it, most of them think yes, it is making an impact. That's positive.
That's great.
So,
of course, I did try to bias the audience, but
your biases, everyone's biased, right? Be honest about it, right? So let's go to some audience questions, and we'll jump back into more chat later. So let's see here. The number one upvoted question with 56 votes. Yeah, it's a democratic voting system here, by the way. So the best questions, based on popularity at least, which is our current algorithm, get bubbled up to the top. We could probably improve that algorithm in the future.
Democracy working right here.
Yeah, exactly, democracy. So by Anthony, there is a stark contrast between the nature of government, seen as slow or stagnant, and that of technology, which is fast-paced and innovative. How do you manage these two opposing ideologies, and how have you successfully combined the two to solve problems?
It's a great question. It gets exactly to the heart of the work. I would say it is the work. That question is exactly is basically our mission, right? That's sort of why we go to work every day, is because that stark contrast is both, I think, hurting this country, frankly, and huge possibility space for change. I will start by just saying that, yes, they are opposing ideologies. They're not just methodologies. They're not just practices. They are ways of thinking. And I get a lot of inspiration in terms of how to go at this problem from two Brits. One is a guy named Tom Steinberg, who created something in the UK that's a little bit similar to Code for America. It predates us, which was one of the things I was looking at as a model when we were starting Code for America. He created an organization called My Society that does great technology for interacting with the UK government. And he's written quite a bit about how important it is for us to start bringing people who have a native understanding of what technology can do. It's not necessarily programmers of any particular sort, but people who understand the digital world must increasingly take leadership roles in government, because we really can't govern if we can't understand how the world works today. And the world is increasingly digital. He's just been very articulate on this subject. And that is sort of the, I would say that the secret agenda of Code for America isn't necessarily creating apps. It's mixing up these two communities, these two different ways of thinking. And of course, they're not so distinct. There's plenty of people that bridge, but getting more people with that kind of way of thinking to take leadership jobs who can solve these problems in these ways. As we place those people in government and increasingly they stay, we're starting to build a government that just has enough people who understand technology in it that we can start to govern again in a digital world. The other person, other Brit that inspires me is the guy I mentioned before who started, or maybe I didn't mention it, but I mentioned the Government Digital Service in the UK. It was started by this guy named Mike Bracken. He's got a long history in digital. He was the head of digital for The Guardian there. And they recruited him to start this unit after, unsurprisingly, a $12 billion failure in the National Health Service, an IT failure. We have those all the time, of course. Anyway, his line and the way that he gets stuff done, and he relies on this, is the strategy is delivery. And that line you can return to over and over again, because you can lecture at people all day long about how they ought to be thinking in this way and they ought to be taking an agile, user-centered, iterative, data-driven approach. That doesn't mean anything until you do something. So our basic strategy is make friends, get enough buy-in that someone will let you in the door, and then don't talk, prototype something and show it to them. Because then you're talking about where the tech is going to go next and why you're making the decision you're making based on user feedback instead of a policy document. And you're not talking about who's right or who's wrong. You're just getting something done. Doing something is by far consistently, 6 years running now, the most powerful way that you can bridge these two worlds.
I love it. You know, that whole mantra, I think, is used at many startups as well. I mean, even companies the size of Facebook, they're encouraged to innovate and experiment. And the whole mantra of code wins, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Like that is the way to resolve a dispute, right? Because you could spend hours or days or weeks or months arguing theoretically about something, but unless you actually try something and actually build it, you'll never actually resolve it. And
that's right.
And so half the times your ideas might be wrong, but by trying and by actually building the MVP, you'll resolve the dispute through data.
That's right. And one of the reasons government hasn't been able to just build something is that there have been very few developers and designers in government. You can't just build something if you've got to go do a giant RFP and a huge requirements document and take it up through a procurement process. Then you're spending, honestly, literally sometimes 2 to 3 years building that requirements document before you can take it to market. When you've got people like Haley Van Dyke and Molly Ruskin and Eric Milland sitting in government who can be like, okay, let me just show you a quick prototype we made, like the next day, the conversation is just completely different.
Wow, that's amazing. So all right, let's go to the next question here. With 58 votes, how do you feel women are treated in the technology field? Does it change as one goes from lower organization hierarchy levels to higher levels in hierarchy?
That is a hard question for one woman to answer with my limited perspective as one person. And because it's very general. I think does the tech industry have a problem with women? Yes, I believe that there is a problem. I think a lot of people have correctly diagnosed their various sources for that problem. Some of them quite subtle and hard to attack. But the number of women in the tech field is actually going down, not up, which is a big problem. I guess from 20 years ago till today, there are actually fewer computer science grads now and fewer women who are staying in tech. At least on the the computer science side of tech, there's a bit more in management, I believe.
Yeah, and I read in the report that in 2013, the states of Wyoming and a couple of others had 0 women, girls, attempt to take the computer science exam, which is unbelievable. And I've seen there's a lot of theories behind this too. And one of the theories that I saw was that, it could be just kind of the lack of peer groups and mentors at a young level, but also the fact that years ago, when programmers first started out, it was all about making video games where people are shooting each other, and those video games were marketed towards boys and men. And then they naturally became programmers. So what do you think about this? How do you think we can improve the statistics?
I feel like it's a really important topic that we need to just keep working on. I think it's largely cultural. And I don't pretend to be the person who has all the answers. I will say from my limited perspective that putting forth that the valuable work in tech is working on, as my husband says, work on stuff that matters, may be attractive to women in tech. If you need to learn to program or design in order to solve a problem that you can see in your own community, either just by walking down the street or because you do a Code for America fellowship and you have access to seeing problems that you wouldn't have otherwise, I think that's going to attract women to want to stay, because I think a lot of women want to solve problems, and they want to solve maybe slightly different problems than men. I mean, I'm not one to generalize really, but I do see a lot of women in government. I see a lot of women in government technology. We have had a history here of being about, in the fellows program, about 40% women, which is, I think better than your average tech startup in terms of gender equity. Our organization, our staff is actually more than that. We're I think over 50% women now. But the USDS and 18F as well, as sort of sister units to ours, are incredibly well gender balanced. They make a big effort to, but I think it's also really attractive to women to come solve these kinds of problems. So, I think that sexism is a problem in technology. I think it's a problem outside technology too. And I think that's a much broader, longer conversation that we need to have. I personally have been very lucky in my career and I don't have a lot of complaints, but I do think that it's a problem we need to solve. And what we say about government technology is, if we're going to solve the problems of the American people, we have a way better shot at doing that if the team that's trying to solve that problem actually looks like the American people, in aggregate. If we can actually represent the experiences of others. I believe that.
That's great, Jennifer. So, for the audience, if there are girls in the audience who are just starting out, maybe you're a student, maybe you're in high school, and you don't have that peer group for support of being a programmer, our kind of theory here is that this is the moment where you may decide to become a full-time programmer. And so we're actually connecting mentors to mentees through the Hack Pledge initiative, which you can find out in your user interface. And we hope to make a very small impact there, hopefully, to help. And so that's kind of our way of maybe making a small impact into this problem. And there's many other ways. A lot of our other nonprofits that are involved in this event have very, very strong initiatives aimed at solving these problems. So we hope you make a donation to the nonprofits, including Code for America, which you can do in the user interface on your screen right now, actually.
Thank you. I hope you all do.
So
can I give one example of that from our network?
Yeah, go for it.
So in addition to our fellows program, we have a program that supports local community groups around the country to code for America in their own cities on a volunteer basis. It's called the Brigades. There's 45,000 people around the country who are involved with Code for America through the Brigades, and they get together and do apps and open data projects and hackathons for their city governments. There's a woman in Philadelphia named Lauren Ancona who got involved with the Brigade. She didn't know how to code. She taught herself to code, or she got help, learning to code and do data work, so that she could create these apps for her community in Philadelphia, and then ended up getting hired by the city, and now is one of their team members on the innovation team in Philadelphia. That's kind of what I mean. we don't teach people to code as an organization, though our community does support women. We have also a partnership with Girl Develop It in Philly. But for any women out there, especially younger women or women of any age who are interested in getting involved in coding, you want to build your resume, you want to build your GitHub, and do it with civic tech projects. Go to your Code for America brigade and say you want to help out, because you're going to have code that you can show that's very highly socialized. It's going to put you in a network of people who care, and it's a great way not just to build your skills, but to build your network.
Great, so let's go to the next question here from Jorge with 57 votes. So I'm going to rephrase his question slightly. He's basically asking, what do you think about the idea that government should use GPL, GNU Public License, aka open source software? Should the governments be using open source software only? And what are the implications of the government doing that? What do you think?
So we only write open source software here. We believe that if we're building it for a government, it's with taxpayer dollars, that it should be available to taxpayers and available to other governments. And it's been great because it's meant that many of our projects have spread very organically. We've had people pick up some project, re-implement it in another jurisdiction. We have that happen all the time. We feel great about it. Some of the stuff is really lightweight civic tech. Some of it's actually stuff like, we built a dashboard for the Louisville, Kentucky jail that helped the people who run the jail go from a situation of overcrowding almost every day to, once they implemented, there was not a single day of overcrowding, or hasn't been since then. And then Denver saw that. They were able to pick up the code, re-implement the code, and run it for the Denver jail. That's huge, right? So obviously my view on this is that I think there should be more open source software in government. Actually 18F's code is open source as well. And we collaborate on some things. We have an issue finder where anybody can come look for a project on our website and easily contribute to it. So it's got the advantages of spread, reuse, and contributions. I guess, do I think every piece of software in government should be open source? I'm not sure I'd be ready to say that. I'm sure there are use cases that aren't relevant to the kinds of projects that we've done that would require something closed. But I'm an enormous fan of it, and it's baseline for everything we do.
So we have over 157 countries attending today for the Hack Summit, developers from all over the world, lots of different geographies. Can they also use this open source software in their local governments? Yes,
of course. And it's pretty easy to find on our website at codeforamerica.org. In fact, there's an enormous network of code for organizations around the country, and they pick it up. That doesn't have to be through them. In fact, next month I'll be going to Poland, Gdansk, Poland, for a meeting of Code for All, which is the umbrella organization or umbrella initiative for all the organizations around the world who have borrowed the Code for America concept and methodology. And so it is, in fact, already in use around the world.
That's amazing. So is Code for All a separate nonprofit? Is in name? How is that organized?
No, and it is simply an initiative that we got some funding to begin, but what we have done over the past 2 years is, first of all, we don't run any of the international groups. Government is something that is different in every country around the world, and so it felt a bit naive to think that we would be able to go, run a Code for Poland or Code for the Caribbean or Code for Germany. So all we do is connect others who've taken the idea and run with it. One of them, actually, Code for Pakistan, is run by one of our ex-fellows. And then over time, what we've said is, look, this should be more like the UN, where we each sort of are participants than us, kind of telling others what to do. Not that we ever really did that. So it's now a very open sourcey kind of loose affiliation of folks. It's not an actual separate 501c3, but if it were, it would be separate, so that we were a member instead of the director.
That's amazing. So the results of your work and your fellows' work is actually having a broad global impact, which is super inspiring.
We hope so. We're inspired by all this stuff other people do around the world. I think we get more excitement about them doing it than they get about us. So
that's great. Okay, so I think that's just about it for questions here. So any closing remarks, maybe career advice for audience members, or best practices for software development, or just any kind of closing remarks you want to close with today?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start with that. I think the key to everything that we do is something that the best software developers and designers already do, which is start with users. If Code for America sounds complicated, it's not. It's basically a bunch of people who say, how do we understand what the user actually needs here, and how do we build for them and get other people to do that? So I hope we have a lot in common with other people, everyone on this Hangout and everyone at the Hack Summit. But whether you're in government or doing a startup or working in a big company or just learning to code on your own, that's something that works all of those places. I would say though that to this audience that it's as I've said, getting involved in government technology, as boring as that sounds, is actually one of the most amazing experiences that you can have in your career. And 5 years ago, that was really hard. The opportunities were more like what you described. You get put in a sort of frustrating situation where you're just doing requirements and doing contracts. But now there are dozens, thousands of opportunities to do government technology that's incredibly fulfilling, fast-paced, user-centered. So 18F and USDS are always hiring. We are hiring, and we are recruiting new fellows, or will be soon. But if you don't have a whole career to put to it, then there's the brigades that we mentioned that meet in, I think there's about 70 cities around the country that have brigades. If your city doesn't have one, you can start one. You reach out to us at brigade.codeforamerica.org. And then if you just have an hour or two and you just want to dip your toe in, go to our Civic Tech Issue Finder and on our website and look for a project that interests you and see if there's something that you can contribute today. You might also sort of meet some of the people, who are running the project and get more involved. But basically, whether you have an hour, Wednesday nights every week, which is like when many of the brigades meet, or a year to give, there's really no excuse not to get involved. And it's amazing, and everyone should do it.
Wow, well said, Jennifer. Well, I want to really thank you for being here. Please consider making a donation through the user interface on your screen. I'm sure Code for America and our other nonprofits will really appreciate that. Jennifer,
will.
They will, yes. And Jennifer, do you have time for a few private questions from audience, or are you on a tight schedule today?
I unfortunately have to go.
Okay, no problem. Well,
but you can send me a thing after as follow-up. I'll be happy to do it.
Great. Or maybe Twitter, could be a way, right? So at some point
on Twitter.
Great. So please use Twitter for any more questions. Jennifer, I really want to thank you for being here today. I'm so inspired by your work here.
Thank you.
I'm a big believer in your mission, and we're just happy to be a very small part of it here at the Hack Summit. So thanks for taking a chance on us and being here with us today.
I love the community you're pulling together. Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. Bye-bye.